Hello, happy Father's Day.
Hello.
Hello.
Lucky to be here. Hello, everybody. Uh, this event is it's going to be one of the high points of my life, actually.
Oh, good.
So let's go. My name is Bernard Lawrence McGowan. Lawrence was my father's favorite cousin. Bernard was my father's father. And my father was Anthony Bernard. This Irishman must have, the one that I know first was, I know about the genes and all that stuff. They started in Basque Spain with the Armada. And I know that because our gene that was showed up, that when the study was done to see if Edward was really Jim's son, he says 95% plus certainty that he is your son, okay? And there's really something very interesting about your Y chromosome, the one that makes you a man. He said it's only found 2 places in the world, the west coast of Ireland and Basque Spain. That's important.
That is important.
Now, you know, I don't know if you know about the Basques, but they're ornery people. They are still talking about secession from Spain. Even though they speak Spanish, they still speak this language that is so primitive that the linguists, the professors, don't know where it came from. I think it might be Neanderthal or some, you know, Cro-Magnon or something like that. It's not Indo-European, I don't think, but just tough people to subject. Every one of my male descendants has this Y chromosome. That's what marks them, okay? And so they have that characteristic, okay? And I'm talking about, you know, same with my brother.
Oh, wow.
Okay? And his kids, Ben, okay?
And the baby. Aren't you having a baby boy?
And the baby.
Oh, that's right. How exciting.
He's my first natural grandson, great-grandson.
Yeah. Did you have a nickname when you were growing up?
It was Head. Has nothing to do with the fact that I smoked a fair amount of pot. We had this guy in our class called, by the name of Joe Blandford, and he nicknamed everybody. They would go.
So it was Head. That was your name. It's because you were so bright. We'll go with that. Okay.
I was born at the Riverside Hospital, Paducah, Kentucky. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. Betty was born at, I think, 9:20. My mother had a party the night before. I'm not sure I wasn't born, you know, a little bit intoxicated. And she was celebrating the fact that she was having twins on her 24th birthday. And my mother's family, they were in Kentucky in the 18th century, 1822, when one of my great-great-great-grandparents was getting married. And that was in Hickman County. My grandmother had hair down to her, below her waist. Black, thick, it's called Cherokee hair. Artie.
Okay, Artie.
Logan. That grandmother, I think, saved my life. It was her grandfather that was the Civil War hero, Nicholas Darnell Logan. His buddy and he both were commissioned on the same day, which was December 12th, 1864. They were having trouble getting officers to command these blacks that were being put in uniforms, okay? Which was the reason for the massacre, because Forrest, who was the most brutal of the cavalry officers, told them when he showed up at this fort that was protecting the Mississippi at Memphis, just 40 miles below Memphis, or north of it, that he wouldn't be responsible for whatever happened if he didn't get an immediate, unconditional surrender.
Do you remember the name of this fort?
Fort Pillow.
Yeah. That's right.
He was brought to Lincoln's attention. Your great-great-great-great-grandfather. Both he and John Porter were from Tennessee. Family has been important for a long time, and so this is talking about
Yeah, the Fort Pillar thing is huge. I mean, it's a huge part of history.
John Porter was wounded in the battle. Okay, he was the other lieutenant, besides one of the lieutenants, that was alive there at the end of the battle. They were the only two alive. I think they took off the major and murdered him.
Oh yeah.
Okay, his name was Bradshaw or something like that.
Wow.
Bradford. Okay, so Confederates captured him and then took him off and executed him for representing these blacks and leading them. But to sign up to have another relative, do what these men did. These are your ancestors. My father, had nothing to do with all of this because his family didn't come over till 1843 when his father came over during the potato famine.
Oh.
He was born in 1817, by the way. Conant Antony. He had 6 sons, really good looking. He says, not so bad to look at.
So, in your area in Paducah, did you guys have other relatives that were living pretty close by that you got to see?
Well, that was my grandmother and her
Artie?
husband, Porter Logan, was her brother. So the thing in Porter was in there. Her father's name was Porter Uri.
When you were a kid, what kind of house were you born into, and like home? Was it an apartment? What was it? And then what were you raised in?
1107 Greer Street was purchased by my father shortly after the marriage, which was, I guess, 1934, for, I think it was $600. We had a flood where Paducah, it's the biggest flood we've ever had in this country, I think, where all these rivers that were right there. It's Cumberland emptied into the Tennessee about 15 miles where the Tennessee emptied into the Paducah, into the Ohio, and 30 miles above where the Ohio emptied into the Mississippi. So this is real river country. Okay, this family, they were all farmers. In 1937, this house on Greer Street was flooded like everything else in the area, and my father wound up let's say, appropriating this John boat, which he took the family out on. This is in February, so we were less than a year old.
So your brother wasn't born yet?
He wasn't born yet. Mother was pregnant she was 5 or 6 months pregnant.
Yep.
And my father stole this John boat and took us to the edge of the town where, strangely, my mother's father had come from the farm. And took them back to the farm where they had everything to eat and so forth. But they'd been living in a grocery store, McClanahan's grocery store, the corner of Ellis and 11th.
I understand that you lived in, or your mom ran a rooming house. Do you remember the address of the house?
224 North 6th Street.
In Paducah.
Yeah.
And tell me about how old were you? How long did you live there? And what kind of chores did you have there?
We moved there when I was 8 years old. My parents bought the home for $4,000. It had been built in 1870 something, and we found in the yard balls, mini balls they were called, from the fighting that went on during the Battle of Paducah. It would have been 1940, 43. I left home when I was 18 years old. I graduated from high school. We lived there at 224 North 6th Street. Dad did almost all the work on the house. It was 2 floors. There were these 2 big wide halls, and the bottom hall, the top one, we had at the end of the stairs that went up. And then there were 5 rooms on each side with a bath on each side, so that the 3 rooms on this side, when we turned it into apartments, would use one half the bath. They would share a bath. The 2-room apartment on the front, so the 3-room would be on the back. The thing is that before we bought the house, I'd gone to a birthday party there, okay? And had a very important event in my life. Aunt of the birthday boy had this contest. She said, I'm giving everybody 2 sticks of chewing gum, and I want you to chew it and then make an object. And so I made a fork. And when she was giving me my prize, she said, you've got very good hands. She said, you could be a dentist, maybe even a surgeon. And I thought, oh, even a surgeon, I think a surgeon sounds better because I was 7 years old.
Wow.
The following year, the house was empty, and my father basically took it apart down to the laths, okay, and used plaster and wallboard, and then 10 years that I lived there, we turned it into a rooming house. I became the bed maker, and so before I'd go to school in the morning, I'd make the beds. 36 men at one time. At that time, there was all men, and they couldn't have women in the room or anything. The mother was pretty, they became friends of the family. I remember the names.
So you had all
So
those.
I know the names of, Frank Hammond, who was a carpenter with 5 kids back in Alabama, and he taught me a fireman's carry, how to take somebody off his feet. Jimmy and I, we had we were paid by the uncles to wrestle and have games like that, but to have this brother and sister to grow up with, and to support each other, that was a major part of our growing up. Betty became this fancy sorority over Tillman High. Went to Boys State. I was the jury foreman for the trial that we had. I was diocesan president of the CSMC, the Catholic Student Mission Crusade. I still got my met a lot of advantages, to be brought up in a small town. Jimmy was the athlete in the family. He handed over basically academics to me and started off the first grade. He was one of the top 2 or 3 students in his class. The other 2 both got appointments to West Point. Unfortunately got killed when they were in their 2nd year on the way home at Christmas time in a car accident. We had a lot of kids have problems. Another couple of Jimmy's best friends drove off into the lake one night, and couldn't get out of the car, and things like that. But we had my next door neighbor, he and 3 other members of his family all got killed in an auto wreck. So they got laid out at the home next door. We had this very poor family there living next door to us, the Halls. And I remember the little Hall girl coming over, mother would offer her an orange, and she'd have her apron, like they say, one for Marley, one for mother, one for so we had a lot of wonderful experiences. Jimmy and I were walking all over that town. We had a baseball team, a Class D baseball team, where we'd walk out to the park and stand outside and get chase balls, baseballs, that would be popped up, okay? We had a park where we had this Noble Park, which is about maybe a couple hundred acres. That was about half a mile from our home, and it had, they claimed, the biggest swimming pool of a public park in the country. Okay, I played a lot of tennis. Okay, I wound up being fortunate enough to be the partner of a kid who was, they were the best tennis players in town. And I wound up partnering with one to be boys champion of the town, playing tennis. I'm back playing competitive tennis right now. I'm taking lessons 3 days a week from this guy who's going to teach me to compete in the super seniors, like Charlotte's father. He was super seniors champion of the country for doubles 2 years. At one time, see, we had a construction boom there. Vice President to Truman lived there in Paducah. Okay, he was called the Veep, Vice President Barkley. And with the political issue and the cheapest electricity in the world, they put an atomic plant there 15 miles outside of Paducah. And they put all these chemical companies. Germany had General Aniline and Film, where my sister's, Betty's husband worked. He was a chemical engineer, okay? I had an offer when I finished college to work for this company, Union Carbide Nuclear, to be a chemical engineer, even though I had all my credits in mathematics, and I took mathematics in order to pad my grades to get into a good medical school.
Right.
So I had almost a minor, for one credit, I would have had a minor in math. Okay, but I took like when I was in college, I took 21, 22, 23 credits every semester. I had all the credits I needed after 3 years. No way was I not going back for my fourth year, where I studied bridge. That was the first semester I had to pay to learn to play bridge. I picked up a half dozen master's points playing bridge.
Wow.
And
that was Notre Dame.
That's when I was a senior.
Okay.
The last semester of being a senior, I basically didn't go to many classes, and my grades for the first time, they just drop out of course in calculus, because for one thing, no way I was going to not go to class and do well in calculus, but I had the general idea. And while I was working at this Union Carbide Nuclear for the 4 summers, I started off in the maintenance department, but I was found to have a spondylolisthesis, some kind of a back problem. And taken out of this job of working in the maintenance department, they were afraid I'd hurt myself, and so they put me in with this engineering group, and that was a wonderful experience, where we were part of a troubleshooting group. We had 2 chemical engineers, an electrical engineer, a mechanical engineer, and these people became friends of mine, and we would sail together, and and they would give me problems to see if I could develop the calculus myself. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to afford to go to medical school or get a scholarship or whatever, so it was nice to have a backup. And yet the thing is that the lady next door, who was a friend of Mother's, she had run a little tiny restaurant over near St. Mary's. See, our house was 1 block away from the school that we went to school for 12 years. Okay, it was 2 blocks from St. Francis de Sales Church, which was on Broadway. Okay, there was Broadway, Jefferson, Monroe. We were almost at the corner of Monroe and 6th. Okay, and so the thing is that we had our little, we were downtown. For fun, we could go to the movies anytime we wanted and walk in and pretend that I was going in to pick up my little brother or whatever, and just walk by the guy at the ticket, smile and have popcorn or something, like I'd come out for popcorn, and he knew that but I'd get in there and
Did you ever live in a house that did not have electricity, indoor plumbing, telephones, anything like
When
that?
I visited the farm, see, the thing is that my grandfather, mother's father, was a tenant farmer. Okay, he had lost 2 country stores and a farm by due to reasons that I will not go into. One of which was just that he signed a mortgage for a neighbor, and when the Depression started, the bank took both of their farms, and so he wound up in basically a one room, and it had a ladder leading up into a shelf
Wow.
where my grandfather, grandmother, and about 5 of their daughters, who were 5 of their kids, were still hadn't left a home at that time. But so things were pretty tough on the farm. But by the time he died in 1947, he had bought what they call the home place, which is a sort of a show farm. It was really a large, like 400-acre farm that looked down a mile away was Poplar Grove Cemetery, where they're all buried. And so
Is grandmother there?
my grandmother lived there, and she would take me as soon as school was out every year. We would take off and go to the farm. I would go. Now Jimmy didn't go every year. He one year we went to scout camp, but that was great. I was 12 years old. But generally what happened was that when I was younger, I would just hang around the farm and look for eggs and sell them to the store, and pick blackberries and sell them. And but as I got older, mother's brothers, who had farms of their own by this time, would hire me to work on the combine. So I'd be tying bags as fast as I could, and I could handle everything up to oats. The oats would come out so fast that I couldn't get the bag. They'd be bigger bags, and they'd come out so fast that I wouldn't be able to tie them without slowing the. So they put a man in my place. When I was working on the combines, I think I started when I was 13. A lot of jobs. I got my Social Security when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
Working picking strawberries, and I worked in a strawberry factory culling strawberries. And when I was 15, I worked as a car hop at Price's Barbecue, and they had this wonderful barbecue. I mean, still haven't ever really, nobody's ever matched Price's Barbecue as far as I was concerned. Money that I made when I was in the senior, see, I tried to make the basketball team, and I was second string sub with not junior varsity center. But in Kentucky, why does a boy become an eye surgeon?
Because he can't play basketball?
Can't play basketball. You know the answer. Everybody in Kentucky knows the answer to that. I worked for 2 years when I was a junior and a senior after school. Rosenfield. I'd buy pineapple sherbets. I always had a sweet tooth, and when I was, I get a nickel for the bus to go in the morning, and a nickel for it. And I would not spend that nickel on the bus, but I'd go home and I had a favorite candy store where I'd get candy. So but it was about 2 miles. I remember various pieces of furniture that had important things. I climbed up on a cabinet in the kitchen and knocked over a can of lye that they'd put up there, and it went down my diaper. That was when I was about 3 or something like that.
Wow.
I know that they had a warm morning stove. That was to have a refrigerator. I remember when we got our first refrigerator. It was such a big event, and I don't remember what. Oh, I know. I remember The man that sold it left a honeydew melon in there, and but before that we had ice boxes, so we got these big things. And I remember going to work, my father's work, and picking him up where he would be coming out of the shop. He worked at a shop where he was a machinist. Got the patent for Illinois Central Railroad. These 3 engineers were sent down from Chicago to try to figure out how good the patents would be for this diesel injector that he invented. Supposedly, somebody in my grandmother's family from Union City that's in our line invented the carburetor for the car. I don't know whether that's really true or not.
That would be your father's side or your mother's
Mother's
side?
side.
Mother's side.
And you told me that your father received a $300,
$250.
$250.
He got $250 for that when he was always putting in suggestions, and he was the one that gave me the idea of where I wound up the first reference on surgical monovision, where I replaced the lens, okay, and the first cataract operation. He told me, he said, "Did you see the paper?" He said, "I know you do these crossword puzzles. Did you see the paper about this guy that put a plastic lens in a guy's eye when he took out his cataract?" I said, "Oh yeah, that was 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of the front page." He said, "Yeah, Bernie," he said, "that's going to be big stuff." A few days later, he said, he said, "You got a lot of time, He said, "That's going to be a very unsafe operation until they really get all the problems worked out." He said, it wasn't until that was 1948, and it wasn't until 1974 that this doctor in Holland, whom I'd been watching, I'd figured out when I saw him hissed at the same in Chicago at the American Academy of Ophthalmology, when he was putting these lenses in children who had traumatic cataracts, and everybody thought that this was just awful, and they were saying that he had financial motives, and it turned out that my father had said, "Check the people that are doing the research on this." He said, "It's going to be a long time." He said, "But when somebody finally announces that it's safe enough to be generalized," he said, "don't go to them, just go to wherever they're working and talk to the other doctors there about whether you can be trusted, whether they can be trusted. And if they can," he said, "come back and schedule a visit with them to come and study under them." And so that's what I did. I went to Holland to study about these implants, and I was one of the first ones in the country to do that. So,
with your dad, do you think that he and grandmother were surprised by your success? Like, how do you think they felt about how successful you became?
I remember when I was about, let's say I was 6 years old, we were working a jigsaw puzzle. We used to do them as a family. And I was putting in as many pieces as the other 4 members. And I'm sure that my dad, mother were letting me do that, but I don't know. But I knew that I had to be, fairly smart. And that's when my dad said, "You're a smart kid, Bernie." He said, "Try to leave the world a better place." He says, "That's the goal of all this."
So you said earlier you went all 12 years to a Catholic school. Your brother and sister too, right?
I did 16 years of Catholic education.
Right. But your brother and sister also went to the local
Oh,
Catholic
yes.
school?
When I was getting ready to start the first grade, okay, the night before, my dad said, "Bernie," he said, "you're getting ready to start school tomorrow." Okay, he said, "You know that I don't make a lot of money." He said, "So I got 3 of you to get a college education for, and it's going to be very important to have a college education." He said, "So I think what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to know that this school you're going to has a scholarship for the boy who finishes first in the class, provided he takes 4 years of Latin and finishes first." And so I went in the next day, and all the kids were registering. The parents were all there, and went up to the front of the room and said, "Everybody, I got something to say. I'm going to win the Notre Dame scholarship." And I did. How did Jimmy get to Notre Dame? He went to St. Joe's. Mother pretended to be him. He was not. He was going to join the Navy. Okay, and so Mother filled out all the applications. Okay, to St. Joseph's,
Which is a college, right?
This college that was about maybe 75 miles from South Bend, Indiana. Okay, and when Jimmy died, he said that he wanted the gifts, no flowers, no anything. He wanted the gifts to go to St. Joseph's. Okay, and so anyway, he became president of his class when he was a sophomore.
Oh.
And so he decided that he wanted to be a doctor too. And but he didn't decide that initially. What happened was that he said he wanted to go to Notre Dame, and so I went to see, and he wanted to join the CIA and his major in economics and so forth. So I went to the dean of arts and letters, and he said if he couldn't get in here, Jimmy was in the bottom half of his class. He said if he couldn't get in at graduation from high school, he said he can't, it won't be acceptable. And so I left, and I was walking by the Department of Commerce, and spent about 5 minutes with the Dean of Commerce, and he said, "Sure, we'll take your brother." So Jimmy came and registered, and immediately switched over to arts and letters, and did a year over there. We took Russian together 6 days a week.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that was one class. That was my last year there, and then he took the sciences to get him into medical school when he decided to do that. And because he was having to bunch his courses, it was pretty tough. And so he started to panic over having to take physics and organic chemistry and biology of some sort all at the same time. And he just said, this is too much pressure. I don't want this. So he withdrew his application from all the medical schools he'd applied to. And suddenly, when the pressure's off, he's in these courses, he does real well. Okay, so he changed his mind, and he came up with the idea. They were starting a medical school at the University of Kentucky, and he called the dean at the University of Kentucky and said, "I'm going to be in Lexington. I wonder if I could come by for about 15 minutes of career counseling." And they accepted him.
So he did 2 years at St. Joe's, 3 years at Notre Dame, and then he went to University of Kentucky?
Yeah. So we both graduated there and wound up being specializing in substance abuse in New York, and becoming the leading specialist in New York in substance abuse. Outpatient detoxification. He could detoxify a person who was drinking, really, really heavy, without putting them in the hospital, by sedating them with the help of their wives and their local doctor. And that's really dangerous, or it was until then, because I remember I had a patient when I was an intern. I did a year of internal medicine, even though I was going into a surgical specialty, because I wanted to be able to take care of myself and my family at not Hopkins #1 internal medicine program, but the one that they used for Baltimore City Hospital, where I got a tremendous amount of experience, and that was great.
That's where you were when Mom knew you.
And that's where met your mother.
Yeah. So you haven't talked much about grandmother. Tell me, are you comfortable telling me a little bit about Louise? About being Louise's boy?
Well, being Louise's boy, I was telling somebody today I guess it was you about
Yep.
your grandmother. I told him a bunch of Louise stories, like how Amanda knew to get out of that 83rd floor that she was going to.
Yeah.
She was one of 3 or 2 people that survived on the 83rd floor. The mother had told her. She says, Amanda, she says, they're going to try to blow that building up again. So if you ever have anything happen there, no matter what it is, you get away from it as fast as you can. As soon as Amanda saw the paper fluttering, okay, she said, I got up, got my purse, said, I'm going to the bathroom, and headed for the elevators, okay? And actually, she headed for the stairs and was going down the stairs, and when she got to the 40th floor, she decided to check and get on the landing, and she got onto the landing, and they had an elevator with the door open, so she jumped on it, and suddenly, bang, it hit, and she jumped off, and suddenly she watched it just drop, compressors lost, and the people there. So she lost a shoe, somebody stepping on her foot,
Yeah.
and so mother, she gave me a tremendous amount of help. She said, Bernie, she said, don't apply to anything but the very top medical schools. She says, they're the ones with the money. She said, the world is so full of men, and she should have said women too, but who have nothing better to do with their money than to pay for the education of a smart kid. Hard enough.
It seems like a lot of wisdom in the two of them in a little country town. It's just, it always made me wonder, where did that come from? Their advice. And I know your father was very bright as a machinist.
Yeah, but he's the one also. He says when you pick the lens power, he said set one eye for distance and one eye for near. And so I'm the first reference on surgical monovision.
I know, it's what I'm saying. I mean, it's amazing. I think
from 2 different angles, like one common sense
Yeah.
and one common sense
Yeah.
almost, and one
mathematical,
engineering and
Yep.
mathematical
Yep.
and brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, here, I'll give you a couple of 3 stories about Mother. She was having her eye operated. I was doing her cataract operation, and all at once, from underneath the drapes, I hear, you know what? If anybody had ever told me that having my eye operated on would be fun, I'd tell them they were out of their mind. She says, but this is really interesting. Okay, that's one. When she was getting ready to have her gallbladder removed, okay, she said, I'd like to take that home with me, okay? And they said, oh, well, we really don't do that. And so that night she got up, put her robe on, went downstairs, found the pathology lab, let herself in, found her gallbladder and took it.
What?
Okay,
You had another one?
here, there's another one. Let's see.
Her sisters.
Oh yeah, what? Dr. Myers? She's lying under. She's having her eye operated on again by this. They're going to remove this vascular membrane from her macula, which caused her to lose, down to 2400 vision. By the way, when she had 2400 vision, she kept her car,
I remember.
and she would get up at 2:00 in the morning
Yeah.
and drive it all over Paducah.
I was in the car with her once. Wrong way, one way, not good. Not good.
Okay. Anyway, Myers, she was having her eye operated on, and she said, Dr. Myers. Suddenly, all the talk there around the operating stops. Dr. Myers. Nothing. Oh, hell, boys. Do your best. No, she said, is Dr. Myers in the room?
You were
And
there.
then she said, oh, hell, boys, do your best. Chose to have her, she was doing a stress test, and they rushed her from there to have what wound up being a quadruple bypass. And she had a doctor there in Paducah do her quadruple bypass. I don't know how much he'd done, but he nipped a what do you call it, a phrenic nerve, and she wound up getting pneumonia and having to go into a nursing home. And so she said, never again. So when she had her stroke, she was, lifting up her hand, and she said 2 words. One was, I said, Mother, on about the 5th day, I says, if you don't let them replace your nasal gastric tube or put in an IV on you, I said, no. Just like that, about that loud. She hadn't said another word. And about 3 days later, or 2 days later, she said, God. And those were the 2 words that she said,
And that was November of '98. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, she's quite a girl. So I was, the character of these people, and their dedication to the 3 of us. Betty winds up at the Masters and winds up a high school English teacher, and Betty had not a huge number of boyfriends, but both of them wound up. One was manager Ted Turner, made Eddie Haas, whom she was dated, for a couple of years. He wound up playing for the Cubs, and he made him manager when he bought the Atlanta Braves. They made Eddie, and Eddie described it. He said he had time for a cup of coffee. That means that's one of these when they make the show. They're just there for a little while. And let's see. Oh, she also dated Neiman Bennett, who was the coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So
And
we got.
you told me when she came to town, she had told one of the women she worked with that she'd found the guy she was going to marry, A.B.
Oh, mother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, this is a Louise story. She was sitting at the, I think it was the Blue Moon Cafe or wherever.
Would that be in Paducah?
On an orange crate, she said, and in comes Daddy, and she said he walked past her, and he turned around and came back. He says, "Little girl," he said, "where have you been all my life?" He said, "I've grown old and gray looking for a woman like you."
He was very handsome. Have you ever seen a picture, John?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, he
So
was
she went home and
very-
told her roommate she was going to marry. She knew who she was going to marry. And she said, "Who?" She said, A.B. McGowan. She said, "Oh hell." She said, "Every woman in Paducah wants to marry A.B. McGowan." She said, "I'm going to do it."
Now, what was their age difference? Do you remember?
11 years.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that much, but yeah, he was quite the player, I think.
Yeah, he was an interesting character. Yeah.
Well,
He's
we
a good
kind
man.
of
both very religious. I mean, I gave Mother, I wrote her a check to go to Israel like I did with you and your mother.
hmm
And she went down to the church, and they were doing this building fund, and she signed it right over to the church.
Did that make you mad?
Not at all.
Yeah. So some of the other questions I had, you've kind of touched on them. I wanted to know about, like, if you liked games, what kind of games as a kid, toys, fun things, you like to do, but you've kind of covered that you snuck in. Well, you didn't really sneak into the movies, but you went to the movies and.
Well, this is another daddy story. When he told me about this first eye surgery that had been the first cataract surgery, first replacement of a lens, he said, "I know you do these crossword puzzles. Okay," he said, "you can fill in every single block there, and nobody gives you a penny." He said, "Bernie," he said, "the world is so full of puzzles that if you solve one, you'll be rich and famous."
A lot of wisdom. What I remember most, one of my last conversations with grandmother, I told you this, was that she was in her 80s, obviously, at that point. And she said to me, she said, Jalen, the weirdest thing is if I close my eyes, I feel like I'm 32. She said, and then I look in the mirror and I go, who is that old woman looking back at
Who
me?
is that old lady over
And
there?
I feel that way now in my 50s, and I'll never forget that she said it. I think I'll be very similar to her if I make it that long.
No, you're very much like Mother.
I feel it.
Oh, really?
I know, I really feel it. Very fiery, very matriarchal.
Good mother. You know, super mother.
Well, I think more so than anyone I grew up with.
Yeah.
I definitely, for me, the genetic is very strong with you guys. Did you have any childhood heroes?
Stan Musial. He played baseball. In fact, I knew, like almost personally, all the St. Louis Cardinals. I followed them. They won, 1946. They went up against the Boston Red Sox in the World Series and won. And
So you like
played
baseball.
against the Brooklyn Dodgers too. So, but I bought. Talking about using my money, I bought on layaway a $50 radio that that was strong enough that I could pick up FM
Wow.
from Cairo, Illinois. No, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So we had those rivers there, and the Missouri was right across the Mississippi.
Do you have any songs from when you were a kid or when you were a teenager that do you remember? Because you're very musical. Do you remember singing any songs?
Dancing with my darling on the Tennessee wall. Anyway, they tried to tell us we're too young, you know.
Does it seem like a long time ago?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. That was like 75 years ago, 65 to 75 years ago. So that's a fair length of time, you know. What I don't know, what I don't believe, is that I'm 81 years old.
That's what I mean.
I mean, I'll tell you, this being 81 years old, my memory is, in some ways, as good as it ever was.
Who was the oldest relative you remember as a child?
Well, it was my great-grandmother, Mimi's mother. This is my mother's mother.
Okay.
She was looked after. She had 14 children, and only 4 of them volunteered to take her for a season. Okay? And one of them was not my grandmother, but her husband. He said, "You're taking your mother." So he took responsibility for taking her for a 3-month period. I've been in the cemetery just outside of Union City, where, in fact, I went on a tour with Wanda and Wallace. And if you ever want to see the family graves, the person to use to show them to you is Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he gives tours.
He's his cousin.
Okay, and he is really, really so happy to be a member of this family. You know, he and Beth Ann were adopted by Porter and Vivian.
Oh.
Teresa was a natural child of Wallace and Wanda. After they had been married 7 years, they had given up and adopted David. Eh? So that, interestingly, when Jimmy's funeral, the wake, I mean the dinner that we had, there was Edward, Logan, and David there in New York,
Right.
who had come in for Jimmy's memorial service. All 3 of these were, additions to the family. glad for the additions. The way you've been able to work with these women, these girls, pretty amazing. To be the kind of father that John's been,
Yeah.
where he basically he's the go-to guy for these all these people in his family.
Yeah.
The effort that he puts in to show them how important it is, And so the thing is that this character that runs through the family, the intelligence, but without works, without trying to make the world a better place, pass it on to the next generation. Obviously, it brings tears to my eyes. My dad said he was such a sentimental guy. The whole family had been settled in Worcester, Ohio. Daddy was born in Toledo.
Mm-hmm.
They were all railroad
That's his
people.
father.
Yeah.
Dad's father worked on the railroad as a section foreman, meaning that he had one person he worked with, an apprentice, who they would go up and down the tracks on these
Yeah.
carts, hand-operated carts, fixing the rails.
So this is B&O Railroad? Okay. How funny. Baltimore. Ohio.
Dad's father was a freight conductor. Okay, his mother, Dad's mother, was a neighbor of Casey Jones' widow.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
So a little Americana in there.
So did Evelyn, your grandmother, did she...
Oh, I got more stories. Okay.
Okay.
Daddy's uncles. Okay. One went to Panama, and he wound up working on the Panama Canal, and then putting boats through the canal, working as basically as almost like the engineer on a train. And his family became one of the founding families of Panama City.
Oh, wow.
I ran into a fellow at an AT&T store about a year and a half ago, where he said, "Oh, I had a good friend named McGowan." And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Panama City." I said, "Oh,"
That's pretty cool.
and
And this was in Key Biscayne.
I didn't go check it out, but Daddy's cousin, the only one to ever come see us. He had two cousins come see us, but one of them was Marie, and she came from Panama City and brought us coins, to Paducah. No, we never knew too much about Daddy's family. His favorite cousin, Lawrence, turned out to be a bad alcoholic and died at 33 or something like this, 35.
Your mom, so I guess I was really shocked. I didn't know that she had had a baby in 1950 that passed away. Did the baby live at all?
No,
And,
baby was stillborn.
okay. Full term?
Yeah.
Do you remember his name? John. John was his name.
Yeah.
John was his name.
That was Mother's full term.
Yeah, when I learned about
Excuse me. She had she had a premature. I mean, not a premature, but she had a full term baby as her first baby. And when we were 14, she had another baby that was named John, that supposedly had his heart on the wrong side, and he lived for like a few hours.
Yeah.
Next door neighbor we had 20 we had 20 rooms in our house.
Uh-huh.
Okay, the hall that was Letty Unsalt, and then she married a Sanders, and she and her husband were given plots. Letty had bought my microscope for me.
Oh.
We had to pay $225 for a monocular or maybe a binocular. Yeah, binocular microscope to do histology when we were in medical school, and I wouldn't have had money for something like that.
What do you think are the strongest physical traits in your family?
Gray hair. My father's hair had never turned totally gray. He had black hair, but his father's hair was very white, and his mother's hair was very white. She lived to be 93 years old, and had been foolish to refuse to have her cataract removed. Okay, until finally she couldn't read the dictionary. This family, talking about physical traits is one thing, but this way with words. Daddy just loved to be quizzed on vocabulary. Okay, and his mother, though, she finally agreed to have the cataract operation when she couldn't read the dictionary to look up words that she didn't know when she was reading. And she was she lived, I think she was about, I want to say about 88 or something like that, when she finally agreed to have the cataract removed. And between the time it was scheduled and the time it was done, she had a stroke. And then at that time, you couldn't be stroked with all the spasticity and so forth, and have the cataract operation, because they had to do such a big incision that you could cause yourself to lose the, so the doctor wouldn't do the surgery, and so she never had the cataract operation, and spent the last 3 years of her life totally blind. And died cursing God for the miserable life she had. She was really
So what was her name?
very bitter about that. Evelyn Hortense Gurney. That was Daddy's mother.
Did you ever think if you had to do any job other than being an ophthalmologist, did you have a backup plan?
Well, I thought probably some kind of real estate developer. Mother bought this farm for $25,000. She and her sisters went in on it, and she bought it because it had a creek going through it, and she knew that she was going to have lakefront property when they dammed the Cumberland River for Lake Barkley. And so she winded up with 1.07 miles of lakefront property, and when the state built an interstate across it and split it in two parts, she sued them for $1 million, but I think she got $50,000, which is okay. And then when finally, after Mother died, I sold the property to some people that were interested. They were the son of the people who had owned the farm originally, and they wound up at one point. I visited there, and they had 18 homes on that property, and she had paid $25,000, and I think $425,000, something like that.
Oh, no, I think we wound up with 45,000.
So what did she say?
45,000 is what she thinks you ended up with.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Mother insisted on our splitting up the money, and Betty had a little resentment about that because she had done all this, looking after Mother, but she still wanted to make sure that all the kids got the same amount.
So with the professional success, And I know that you're living a very happy life right now. What accomplishment are you most proud of?
The fact that I've got a happy marriage. That I got this fantastic wife that I just dearly love.
That actually leads me to my next set of questions.
That's the hardest thing I ever did, was to wind up, with in a good marriage.
How did you meet this beautiful girl? Miss
I
Sharon?
saw her walking down the stairs at the hockey game on these wooden stairs, and she had this mink coat on, black mink coat, almost to her ankles, and her hair was black curly, way down, past her shoulders, and I just, never got over that.
Now, what year was that?
What year would that be? Let's see. Douglas was 10 years old, so that would have been 1985. And then, yeah.
So
So
85.
she and I had what we call matching baggage. My story about us was that I saw her sitting next to Charlotte at a hockey practice, and I went up and sat down next to her, and I said, so what are you up to? And she said, oh, I'm out here looking for a significant relationship. I said, so what do you got in mind? She said, something like my parents. She said they adored each other. They had a lot of fun. A lot of, they built 10 nursing homes and restored a couple more, and so I said to myself, sounds good to me, and then for like about 3 or 4 months or whatever, 5 months, I was trying to deal with the fact that here's this good looking, she's 14 years younger than I am. And my parents used to have a little stuff about the fact that my dad was 11 years older, and mother complained about that. Or he had her complaining. I think it was mainly he had a little sensitivity about it, and so I had a little problem with that. It took me a while to deal with the fact that the guy that she'd been with for the 4 so years was her age, and at that time before he got fat, he was a good-looking guy, and I was out of shape, sort of green. I wasn't exercising and so forth, and she was, working out. But anyway, when she called me to take me to the most expensive restaurant in Boston, I declined not because she was going to pay for my dinner. That was okay, but the fact that she was going to drive, so that didn't really stop being a problem until last month, right? She's not talking. Okay, so the thing is that she's a good driver. And
So where was your first date?
where did we go? We went to Legal Seafoods, the one down at the what was the name of the hotel there?
Park Plaza.
The Park Plaza. Okay, And so I'm running my academic pedigree, doing all this bragging and so
Love it.
forth. And she suddenly she just goes like this. She said, "This is not going to work." She said, "I didn't even finish college." She said, "I just want to have fun." I said, "Me too, me too." So, but it was when she called me I told her I was just getting over a relationship, and I really just, still sort of, intimidated over this idea of her being that much younger. But eventually it sort of worked out. And so.
So when you proposed, was it like an event, or did you kind of go to your jeweler, or like how did that happen?
When I proposed, you remember when I proposed? So you can ask her about it, but because I just remember.
I'll just remind you, and you'll fill it in. Remember, we were going to go to Las Vegas? You invited me to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
What did I say? We started dating in February. In March, you said, "Come to this convention with me in Las Vegas."
Oh yeah, you said I don't see a ring on my finger, right?
I did.
So what did I say then?
Let's go to the jeweler.
Yeah.
I think
Something like that. They had a family jeweler
Oh, no doubt.
that I got this great ring from her. For her it was anyway.
It wasn't quite that fast.
The guy that she was dating between these, he got the same number of carats, but the yellow thing, it was really cheap. She
very cheap.
I was able to, with help, to get this, high quality diamond that we're still.
How would you describe Sharon, and what do you admire most about her?
What do I admire most about her? Well,
And how would you describe her?
stubborn. She's she's got a mind of her own, and she's a very feisty. She's needs to keep reminding me that she's no pushover, and she's not gonna let anybody take charge. And so the thing that I love most about her is that she's a good woman. Okay. And that she's that she puts up with me. She said, "What are you looking for?" I said, "Somebody that'll put up with me." So she said, "Hell, that's not what I'm looking for." I said, "You will, because I'm sure I've been. She will support this also. Tough. I had a lot of growing up to do. Okay, and I've been working on this, trying to mature, and
How's it coming?
huh?
How's it coming?
Well, I think I'm doing okay, and, I'm not so self-satisfied to say that I don't have a lot of room for improvement, but I'm okay. Okay.
So what's the key to a successful marriage?
the key to success in marriage is humility. It's willingness to work at it, to use your life experiences of trying to hang out with the smart guys and use other people's wisdom to become the person that you're meant to be. I think those are the main things.
That leads to the next one. I want to come back to this a little bit, but give me 3 great quotes that you'd like me to remember my whole life, or all of us for that matter. Me, John, Doug, Jack.
3 great quotes.
Anybody else?
You know, that's really hard for me because my father said that quotations were the ways to pick the great brains.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wound up collecting quote books.
I know, you've given me a bunch. I'm going to give one to John this weekend, unless you have one. Do you have a quote book, John?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think I've given them all the way.
Well, you've given some to me. I'm going to give one to John.
I showed up late.
But you showed up.
Anyway, let's see. I don't know. I've got so many. What's the thing you hear most?
I think that you like to quote Benjamin Franklin and Merton. What's his name?
Thomas Burton.
Thomas Merton. And there's another, I forget. But those are some of the...
Well, you know, the ones that I remember, I mean, I don't know. I've got so many. I don't know. A lot of Shakespeare.
How about from your dad?
From my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, his these pithy little sayings.
Mm-hmm.
He used the word pithy.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Me too.
He said it's the way to pick the great brains. His quotes. I never thought I'd really be stopped on
I mean, you've always shared some with me. I don't know if they're quotes or pithy sayings, but like, he who doth not tooteth his own horn is one going. He who doth not tooteth his own horn.
Who tooteth not his own horn, his horn goeth untooted. Well, I overdid that.
Which
one.
is horrible. We're not supposed to say that on your video, but that's like horrible. But there's a truth to it. I guess it's a good thing for marketing.
I'm working on that one, okay? Because I'd rather have,
That's part of humility.
be remembered for, here's one. Okay. Frank Lloyd Wright said, early in life I realized that I had to accept that honest arrogance in preference to dishonest humility. And I found that in my case, I had a lot more room for honest humility that I needed to really recognize that I'm not as special as I might have thought that I was. That there are just too many people in this world who have such a much better take on things and who have so much to contribute and who have accomplished so much without blowing their own horn,
Were there any? You were a very gifted surgeon. Period. Were there any patients that you particularly remember that either affected you, or that by you using your gifts on them, that had extremely strong impact. Like, do any of those cases stand out in your mind where you could walk away from that room and go, okay, I made a difference there?
Well, I went to the Philippines to operate with Orbis,
Yes.
and I took a microscope, an inexpensive binocular microscope, and left it there with the surgeons there in the Philippines because they couldn't afford the $1,500 that it would cost. But the pictures that I got when I was there of these people who were came to me with white cataracts, and who the morning after were just looking me in the eye and just so grateful, grabbing my hands and kissing them.
I mean, I remember seeing that in Framingham. I was telling these guys when we walked. You took me once see some of your post-op patients in Framingham, and they were getting the violets. Every patient got a violet. You might know that already.
Violet. That was the first color that you lose. The ultraviolets.
Yeah.
The cataract cuts it out.
Yeah. Everyone got a violet, and they were just so over the moon about you, patient after patient after patient. And that was in America. So I can only imagine that in the Philippines, it was such a blessing.
Yeah.
That was where you used your gift,
Yeah.
especially as a blessing.
Well, to be working in eye surgery, to give somebody the gift of sight, and to have people who hadn't seen in years, suddenly get their vision back, and to work with people like, the best surgeons that I ever saw. I think the top 4 were all Asian. And they had a kind of skill that I was happy enough with my own skill, and I came up with the suture technique that mathematically I had devised. I used to work with the people over at MIT on. I'd call up and I'd ask to speak to the department head about a cantilever. I was working on a speculum. Ask if somebody in there, some young professor, would give me some time working on material flexibility or something like this to come up with the solution to some kind of a physics problem with the eye, a material or an instrument. I used MIT like a think tank, and so that was kind of nice. It was one of the reasons I stayed in Boston after I finished my training there, to have a school like that to do my research with. And,
If you could talk to 18-year-old Bernie McGowan, I don't know if you went by bus, car, or train to Indiana as a college freshman, what would you want him to know? Like, if you could just advise him in some way with some incredible dose of wisdom that you might have now that you had no clue back then.
18-year-old?
18-year-old Bernie, what would you tell him in a nutshell? Is that too vague? Like, if you had to finish the sentence, Bernie, don't waste your time on...
Don't waste your time on worrying about money. Okay? That'll come. It follows. Follow your dream. Try to make a contribution to the world.
But he did that.
Well, but that's what I tell any kid, you know, is to leave the world a better place.
That's what your father said. And so, even though this is not your death talk or anything, I mean, I know that, I'm not trying to say that, but in 30 years or so, when it's time for you to slow down, what would you want people to most remember about you?
That I actually had learned to play the guitar. You know what I was doing a few days ago? I'm using the fact that I've learned all 6 figures for E pentatonic minor scales, and I'm now using those to play over the. I'm going to be. Sharon's seen me try to do this just the first day I was ever able to do any of it, and it wasn't really all that impressive. But the thing is that to be able to make music and not just be trying to figure out the the rhythms and the notation, and be able to read music and so forth, which I'm doing still and making real progress on. But these lessons that I'm taking, I've got this wonderful Argentinian tennis coach, and we're going to be having lessons 3 times a week, and I'm hoping to actually wind up playing competitive tennis again. You know, a couple years ago, maybe 5 years ago, so when I started playing, I actually won the 70 and older doubles tournament.
That's what you want people to remember about you, that you're playing the guitar. Because I have a hobby that doesn't make the world a better place. I spend a tremendous amount of my time researching ancestry. Like, that's what I love to do. That's a lot of fun to me. But that's not what makes the world a better place. I mean, I'm only benefiting myself, or maybe I'm helping the world by helping my brain kind of work a little bit more, and maybe I'll sharpen up a little bit. But I think that's what the guitar is for you, right? The guitar and the tennis make your brain and your body last longer, right?
You know, thing is that to be an athlete and to it's something, you know, what is about a boy from Kentucky, you know, when he becomes an eye surgeon when he can't play basketball. So but you know, to have a brother like Jimmy, who was actually a very decent basketball player, and would have been captain of the team, but wouldn't vote for himself, you know. And so, but you know, my playing tennis was always I was pretty good, you know, but I never had a coach until this guy that I've got now, and I've got these videos of these play. I go to the Final Four or the Miami Open every year, and I do videos of Djokovic and Nadal. I sat next to Nadal. I was sent one day by this Rebus to see this 19-year-old, or he was 18 years old at the time, play. He said, you know, go over, and we went over, and there was almost nobody in the stands, and but sitting there right next to me was Nadal. And so I asked him, I said, have you played this kid yet? He said, not yet. But I saw the kid on television about, you know, a year ago, blow a shot that would have beat Nadal. And then suddenly Nadal won 17 points in a row. So the thing is that
So we're going to try to close up because I know it's getting too late. Who would you say was the person who had the most positive influence in your life?
who had the most positive influence in my life? Well, my father comes to mind, but my mother, see, uh, I mean, I always felt that Jimmy was her favorite. And it was because, of course, he was the younger, and she had to take care of him. And she could send me off to the farm, and the parents would take care of me. But I just loved my father, you know. And he was taking me when my mother and dad were you know, fighting and so forth, and they were having trouble. They were at one point. He was going to take me, and she was going to take Jimmy, and one of the grandmothers would certainly take Betty. And they both said, "Not on your life. You know, every tub on its own bottom. You work it out." And they wound up actually getting married again in the church, and we became a very religious family. And
over there.
it was.
We can call Molly. Molly!
Shh! Shut up! Okay.
So did I answer that question?
I think you said it was your mother. Your mother had the most, no, your father had the most positive influence on your life.
Yeah, the thing is that I just loved the two of them. Both were, mother, you know, told me about having the, applying only to the most expensive schools, because they were the ones with the money. And my dad telling me about the scholarship that got me into Notre Dame. It got me, you know, 4-year scholarship at Notre Dame. We were just constantly. See, the thing is that they never gave me a lot of instruction. They basically just waited for me to have the desire, and they were very supportive. You know, basically just quietly certain that everything was going to be all right. I had in mind for myself would be sufficient. So neither one of them was, you know, on my neck or on my back or you know, scolding or correcting or, you know, anything other than just, you know, they didn't even say it. "You can do it, Bernie." They didn't say it. It was like they just showed me. Very lucky.
Do you feel that you've been able to convey that to other people? Like, did you pass that on?
I've tried. I don't know. How have I done with you?
You're always very positive. I think that I would describe it as intention. I think the eyebrows, I think language, I think the
I
intentionality.
would be dishonest if I didn't say that the money was important. And, you know, I was told that being a physician, you know, had a lot of prestige also. And, but to believe that, you know, I could make a significant contribution to mankind and still get my piece of the pie. There's nothing like about that. I'm very, very fortunate to have had opportunities. You know, I think it's a lot harder these days. Doug and Jack, I had this very difficult relationship with their mother. And if there's one thing a kid can do, that you know, that a person can learn, is to love their mother. I had this really what wound up being a horrible relationship with Charlotte. She didn't respect me, and I didn't respect her. I think I deserved a certain amount of that. Could have done a better job there. I'd like to thank you and George and your family and John and his family for showing up here and honoring me by caring enough to ask the questions and pay attention to the to my responses, and all the loving